Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq, back with our annual Singapore Fintech Festival coverage. Organized by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the Singapore Fintech Fest is on its 6th edition, and we're proud to be a media partner for the 4th year in a row. Joining me for this segment is Glenn Gore. He's the CEO of Affinity, to discuss putting the ownership of data back into the hands of individuals and organizations. Glenn, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Great to be here.
All right, first, let's start with Affinity. Tell us about that and Web 3.0 technology.
Yeah, so Affinity is a startup based out of Singapore. We're really passionate about putting information back into the hands of individuals and businesses because we believe it drives fundamentally new business models as well as new customer experiences.
Tell us about the fintech space in Singapore. It seems to just be getting bigger and bigger and really becoming a central hub for the space.
Yeah, I think Singapore has done a great job of being, creating a culture and climate that encourages fintech innovation, as well as, from the regulator itself, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, through to Economic Development Board, as well as encouraging, a lot of businesses to not just focus on what's happening in Singapore, but Southeast Asia, as well as the rest of the world as well. And looking at adopting some of the leading edge technologies, such as blockchain technologies, working with some of the crypto work, but also some of the emerging tech around self-sovereign identity and digital identity frameworks as well.
What themes did you discuss at SFF this year?
Yeah, so I was able to present on day one at SFF, and we were talking about what does this Web 3.0 technology stack actually look like, and what are some of the components. And while a lot of us have probably heard phrases in the media such as, the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, non-fungible tokens or NFTs and how that relates to art, there's actually a lot of other technologies that make up the Web 3.0 space. For example, this concept of verifiable credentials, which are attestations of a fact that we as individuals can have issued to us by a bank, for example, saying, Jill, you have a bank account in Singapore, for example, and that bank account may have at least $10,000 in it. And you can use that to get a loan from another loan provider without having to share your entire account statement based on a paper statement, which is what we do today. So we talked about verifiable credentials, we talked about self-sovereign identity and this concept of issuers, verifiers and holders, and how you can exchange information without the verifier necessarily having to know who the issuer was, for example.
Right, and I'm glad you brought that up when it comes to fintech, because we first think of crypto or digital assets, but the application of it is way more vast than that. Even if you drill it down to shop owners, to people who don't have health insurance and how to democratize that, there's so many different use cases for it. So what do you think fintech looks like in 5 years from now? How can we make all these things that are accessible, really accessible to global emerging markets, as an example?
Yeah, look, I think actually some of this is starting today, Jill. One of our partners, Good Worker, for example, based in India, focuses on some of the poorest people in India, the rural blue-collar workers. And, these are individuals that have dropped out of the education system, often at the age of 8 or 13. They're supporting an entire family. And, the reality is they're getting left behind in this, what is becoming ever more a digital economy. And so Good Worker focuses on creating a digital identity for them, placing them into work, and then as they do that, collecting information and putting that in a digital wallet that's owned by the blue-collar worker. And that's really important because that creates a digital identity for the individual that they can then pass the stringent KYC, know your customer rules, that banks have to apply by. And so that not only allows them to get their first ever bank account, but it actually takes out a lot of fraud in the system. You can imagine if you don't have a bank account and you're working in another city and you're trying to send money back to your community in a rural part, the opportunity for people to fraudulently handle that money, unfortunately, is really high. And so in 5 years, I think we have to, as an industry, be better at the inclusive finance nature of giving everybody access to this digital framework. But I also think it's also going to have a huge impact on the security of information. We're sharing way too much information. We don't have a lot of transparency about what parts of our identity are being stored by who, how that's being used, how that's being monetized. And so as we flip that ownership back to the individuals, it's going to be great, Jill, because today I'm the one that has to log into other websites, but in the future, hopefully, those brands are going to log into my digital wallet and I can control what they access and give consent to how my information is being used.
And so interesting, Glenn. Let me throw one more question at you before we go. And do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic helped to accelerate some of these digital trends? Where for a while, I mean, we really truly were contactless payments, especially in the beginning when people weren't physically exchanging money. Do you think many of these trends were accelerated as a result of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, COVID-19's been the biggest, unethical social experiment we've ever run around the world, but at the same time, it's been a catalyst for innovation. We've seen that from, telemedicine to how education has shifted, cashless payments. But one of the areas it has accelerated is actually the adoption of Web 3.0 technology. So we see now as the world's borders open up, we're having to prove, am I vaccinated against COVID? Have I passed a PCR test, for example, as I cross international immigration points? And what we don't realize, and this is the magic of Web 3.0, by the way, is that a lot of when you see those little QR codes on our test results and vaccination records, they're built often on smart health card standards or verifiable credential technology. And that allows us to have, kind of seamless movement of people across borders, but there's no central authority. There's no single global authority that approves what a health credential looks like, for example. And this is a classic example of a decentralized information exchange. It's incredibly time important because you want to kickstart the economy. You want to reconnect families that have been separated. All of that's actually built on Web 3.0 technologies. In Affinity, we have COVID-19 solutions that are actually protecting borders. And if you come into Singapore, for example, using the vaccinated travel lanes, it's based on that Web 3.0 technology today.
Right. So interesting. Just makes it easier to digest when you think about the technology in that respect. Glenn, it was great to meet with you. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks, Jill.